All right. Assalamu alaikum, believers. It's so good to see you all, or to at least see your names this morning. You are in for a real treat on behalf of the Masjid Al-Taqwa Taleem Committee, Dr. Gloria Bashir and Dr. Aisha El-Amin. My name is Lionel Allen Jr., and I want to welcome you all this morning to the first of a series of Taleems that's going to focus on the history and valuable contributions of African-American Muslims as we embark upon this wonderful month of Black History Month. In just a few minutes, I'm going to pass the microphone over to our honored guest, who's going to be serving as our presenter today. But before I turn it over to her, inshallah, I want to open with our Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Aduhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. I am so excited to get this started today. I am. We are so fortunate and so blessed to have with us a real pillar of our community, Sister Aisha K. Mustafa. And I'm going to take just a few minutes, inshallah, and read through her bio. And then I'm going to pass it over because I don't want to eat up any more time. So Sister Aisha K. Mustafa has been editor of the Muslim Journal weekly newspaper since January of 1989. She graduated from Bucknell University in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, with a bachelor's degree and double major in psychology and political science. Her master's degree in journalism is from the Columbia College of Chicago. She is the third woman editor, just the third woman editor of the 46-year-old newspaper, successor to Muhammad Speaks, and is the its longest tenured editor. Sister Aisha converted to Al-Islam in around 1974, 1975, joining the community of Imam W. Deen Muhammad through the Atlanta Muslim community. She moved to Chicago in 1975 and worked throughout Muslim community offices, including Sister Clara Muhammad School, Prison Dawah, and the Muslim Women's Development Class. In 1978, she was named lead instructress for the Muslim sisters trained by Imam W. Deen Muhammad in formation of the Women's Group Committee to enhance the role of women in society. Her initial job in Chicago was as a transcriber of Imam Muhammad's lectures that were used to create the Imams kits that trained former Nation of Islam ministers and captains for the role of Imams, a time which she calls her greatest learning experience. She also traveled with delegations led by Imam W. Deen Muhammad several times, going to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh, Jeddah, and Mecca, Jerusalem, and the West Bank, witnessing Imam Muhammad's meeting with Palestinian President Yasser Arafat. She was a presenter at the three-day International Media Conference hosted by the Focolare Movement's Net One Media Group, held in Rome, Italy in 2004, with 800 participants from over 20 countries. She made Hajj to Mecca in 1977 with the first and then largest Muslim American group led by Imam W. Deen Muhammad, and has made Umrah several times. Sister Aisha was one of the inaugural hosts of the 7 daily one-hour talk radio shows every Friday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. for Radio Islam, continuously live streamed at www.radioislam.com, produced by Sound Vision Foundation on WCEV 1450 AM, and she remained so for 7 years. In 2015, she joined the Tougaloo College Mass Communications Department faculty as an assistant professor after 2 years as adjunct professor. Recently, she became a board member of the International Museum of Muslim Cultures in Jackson and on the advisory board of the Mississippi Free Press. And recently added to the Board of Justice for All, founded by Imam Malik Abdul Mujahid. Aisha was named the Muslim Woman of the Year by the community of Imam W. Deen Muhammad in 1994. A street, check this out now, a street in New Medina, Mississippi, has been named in her honor at New Medina's 25th annual retreat of 2011. Look, as I said before, just so excited and honored to be able to introduce Sister Aisha and to be able to welcome her to the virtual microphone. But before we do that, can we give her a virtual round of applause for all of what she's done in our community and the contributions that she's made? And Sister Aisha, I want to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here. And I now turn it over to you to lead us through this presentation today. Thank you so much.
Praise be to Allah, and thank you all of you so very much for having me. All of the people on this panel, on this virtual board could very well give a presentation on our Muslim and our African-American history and keep us all spellbound. I just want to make one notation about my street in New Medina. Is one of those aspirations. We got to hurry up and put a building on the street. Right now we have a street sign and there are homes in New Medina too. You who have gone to New Medina for their retreats, it's a beautiful, aspiring concept out of our community. And I'm appreciative to be connected with it, be a part of it. And it is my goal to really put New Medina and my street on the map. Right now we have the street, so now we're going to the map. Okay, but today I'd like to open up because this is an amazing commemoration. February 6, 1996. This was the day 26 years ago when Imam David Muhammad made the invocation on the floor of the US Senate, being the first Muslim to do so in the US Senate. His prayer in 1992 resonates profoundly now, as it appears the United States is at a crossroads in need of search of what direction to now take in this 21st century of the new millennium. With the onset of fears of losing ground that was won by brave, devoted African-American men, women, Christians, Muslims, and others who sacrificed their lives, their resources, their comfort, I want to present this prayer. And when we say they made sacrifices, yes, we mean they gave up their lives. They gave up their resources. They gave up their comfort. All of those things for us to have just basic rights, civil rights with basic human rights. One asking for the Eiffel Tower. We were just asking for something as simple as, I want to go take a vote. I want to vote and I don't want to be humiliated with someone asking me to tell them how many jelly beans are in a jar, which my father and the men of his era were subjected to. So this is the prayer Imam Muhammad made on the floor of the US Senate, February 6, 1996. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. With Allah's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. Our creator, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer, who opens for all people a way to have a good conscience and a good life. Grant to this nation that Americans continue to live as a prosperous nation, of many as one, and as a people taking pride in human decency, industry, and service. Let us pray that this great nation's 2 centuries of national life may inspire other nations to move towards social and economic justice for all. Grant that her big heart for charity, compassion, repentance, and mercy continue to be strong within all of us. Grant that Americans always have more hope than troubles and ever grow in goodness and in wisdom. Bless Americans to always cherish our freedom and the noble essence of the American people. Grant that we Americans better understand our brothers and sisters around the world and reject unsuitable national pride for a global community of brotherhood and peace. Bring all citizens and government together, those of great means and small means, to appreciate more our nation's solemn pledge of peace and justice for all. Bless the parents, our troubled youth, our burdened inner cities to never be without hope and direction. Bless Americans to keep to the best of our ways. Ameen. That was our leader, Imam W.D. Muhammad. Even though that was 26 years ago, it just sounds so more relevant and urgent today that we have that type of prayer, because just looking at the recent news, we have 2 political parties, right? major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And the National Republican Committee just recently, the NRA just recently referred to the January 6, 2021 insurrection. They titled it, they called it Legitimate Political Discourse. So if we're not careful, we can be on a slippery slope, and sometimes we slide backwards. Now, getting directly to our history as Muslims and among African Americans in this great country, of course, even then, our journey started basically with the transatlantic slave trade. We have to remember that there were Muslim Africans among the Africans who were brought through that port, through that channel of slavery into the United States. So we are part of the transatlantic slave trade diaspora. And among them, as we know now, were great Muslim of African descent. Some of them are recorded in the textbooks that are written by Savina Diab, and then there's the author Alan Austin. And these narrations of these Muslim Africans can also be found in the Library of Congress. One particular that I paid close attention to is Abdul Rahman Ibrahimi. And it's because Abdul Rahman Ibrahimi was enslaved in Natchez, Mississippi. He was put on the plantation in Natchez, Mississippi. His history, coming from Africa, it is said that he was a general in his father's army. He averaged about 2,000 men at any given time in his command. He was a horticulturalist, and he was well-versed in Arabic and Islamic studies, well-versed in the Quran. The plantation that he worked on in Mississippi was known for its productivity, mainly because of the knowledge of Abdul Rahman Ibrahimi, who was a horticulturalist. So it can be attributed that that plantation was productive, successful, especially because of him. In his latter years, Ibrahimi made an appeal to return to Africa. He continuously made that appeal to the point where he eventually got the ears of people in Washington, and he was given permission to return to Africa. And after given permission, he wanted to take his family. But the ruling was, you can be free, Ibrahimi, but your children are property, and you would have to purchase your property in order for your children to go back to Africa with you. And as is narrated, he worked the rest of his life to try to raise funds to purchase his children, but he died before he completed that mission. And there's so many moving stories about the Muslims among the Africans who were enslaved in this country that we all could take note of. You know, the other one that's prominent in our minds is Omar ibn Saeed in the Carolinas, because Omar would run away from his plantation. They would capture him and put him in jail until his owners would come for him. And while he was in the jail cell, he would use a piece of charcoal and write on the walls in Arabic, making an appeal that he be sent back to Africa. And in the Arabic script, you know, it can be calligraphic, it can be a beautiful script. And the locals would come to the jail just to see Omar ibn Saeed's writing on the wall. Now, the efforts to improve the condition of those who evolved out of that slave existence and all of the things that came with it. Remember, when the slave, transporting of slaves was ended before slavery was ended. So let's think about that. The Europeans made it illegal for ships to continue to bring slaves into the Americas. So it was an illegal transporting of human beings as cargo. However, the system of slavery did not end there. So we here in the Americas, our foreparents was still enslaved, even though there were no new slaves coming in. And you might wonder then, how did the slave system exist? How did it continue? And we have to remind ourselves, people were born slaves. There was a breeding system of slavery. Even someone as prominent as Frederick Douglass will remind us that his father was a white slave master, and he was born from a black slave woman. The system was one of the most offensive systems of treating human beings in the history of mankind. And again, there were many efforts to move us out of enslavement and to improve the conditions, especially with the movement of Marcus Garvey, the Back to Africa movement. And from him, Imam Muhammad would point out the other movements behind Marcus Garvey, Father Divine. We had Noble Drew Ali. We even had the Muslims in our communities. The most prominent Muslims in our communities at the time were the Ahmadiyas. And then Honorable Elijah Muhammad, through his meeting with Farad Muhammad, as we know that history, started the Nation of Islam. Farad was an immigrant Muslim into our country, basically in the area of Detroit, what we call Black Bottom Detroit. Elijah Muhammad and his family had moved up from Sandersville, Georgia, into Detroit. And his wife, Clara, was the one who met Farad first. And in his elaborate teachings among the Africans in Detroit, African Americans, Farad's teachings were, you are a great nation that don't even realize where you came from. You don't know your history. You don't know your origin. And he began to emphasize to them of their greatness. It was Sister Clara who took that message back to her husband and said, this is a man, perhaps he can assist you, perhaps he can help you in your own ability to sustain or gain a dignified life. So we credit really the meeting of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Master Farad to his wife, Sister Clara. And we will make mention of her again later on. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I'm gonna share a file right now so that you can see some of the transition, what we were going through. Just give me 1 second to pull this up. What was it that was so critical that had to be addressed by the likes of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad? And I go directly to the way Imam Muhammad characterized it in his message of concern. One thing that we attribute the Nation of Islam to, among many things, making Black a respectable description of ourselves. James Brown didn't start singing "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud" until the Nation of Islam made being Black popular. When Imam Muhammad came into office, he pointed to another thing that had happened to us, and one thing that the Nation of Islam addressed, and that was white supremacy. White supremacy that was taught and reinforced by Christianity. The Nation of Islam's primary goal was to break the yoke of white supremacy, not only in our mental being, but in our physical being, where it had been reinforced in us physically. And so this was a message that Imam Muhammad started addressing in 1977. He'd just been in the leadership office for 2 years. It's in every Muslim journal, but we need to revisit it. And his message of concern was, what would happen if people would sit in churches throughout the world for centuries with the image of an African-American man as savior of the world before them? What would this do to the mind of the world's children? What would happen to the world's children put under a figure of a particular race presented pitiably and in pain, the savior of all men. Quran Surah 3, verse 64. Say, oh, you people of the book, come to common terms as between us and you, that you worship none but God, that we associate no partners with him, that we erect not from among ourselves lords and patrons other than God. If then they turn back, say, yea, bear witness that we at least are Muslims bound to God's will. Civilized nations should want that their religion be also civilized. False worship is the worst form of oppression. We are not gods, we are only men, mortals among mortals, He Allah created. That was Imam Muhammad's message to us in 1977. It was at the same time that he began to refer to his father in our effort to understand where his position was in history. He said he's one of the greatest social reformers in the history of America. He called him a social reformer, not a prophet. And he also referred to Farad as the founder of the Nation of Islam and his father as the builder of the Nation of Islam. So he was the Nation of Islam itself was dealing with a reverse racism. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad kept us basically in seclusion. It was not for us to be social, look to even African Muslims at this point in time for our direction or for our teaching on al-Islam. And it was because we were also dealing with those, as they say, ghosts of the plantation, the inbred inferiority complex that many of our people had symptoms of. And these were things that the Nation of Islam took on full throttle, straight to the point of what was ailing our people. Again, other people had worked on it, but no one had really resolved the problem of African Americans coming into their full rights out of the concept in the mind and the conditions of being an enslaved people. We also have to give the Honorable Elijah Muhammad credit. A few people seem not to want to accept that he produced great human beings. This book that is the work of Mikhail Sahir out of Indianapolis, Indiana, gives great attention to the impact of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad on some of the greatest men in our history. Of course, one being his son, Imam W.D. Muhammad, one being Malcolm. And, you know, we have great debates nowadays. Somebody wants to attribute Malcolm's success to other people. But we have to remind them, if they had met Malcolm before he had met the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm would still be called Detroit Red. There was a process that Malcolm went through also, even though he had great parents, he had knowledgeable parents, but Malcolm, like the rest of us, like many of us, had fallen to the ways of the street. And it was Elijah Muhammad's influence on him that brought him into being Malcolm X and eventually Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. But all those who claim him now, we say, if you had met Malcolm in Detroit, you wouldn't have paid him any attention because he would just have been Detroit Red. Of course, we give acknowledgement of Minister Louis Farrakhan coming under the teachings and the ranks of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And of course, Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest human beings on the face of the earth, known by recognition. There's not a corner of the earth that could not recognize the name and the face, the person, Muhammad Ali. And just remember that it was a Muslim African-American who came up under the ranks of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Then in 1975, after the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had passed, of course, our Imam W.D. Muhammad came into the leadership. He reminds us, he says, y'all selected me as your leader as you lifted me to your shoulders to ratify my leadership after the Honorable Elijah Muhammad passed. At the same time, we also give credit to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad because we knew that he left the conditions of the Nation of Islam where that would be the direction that we would go in. The conversations, the wording, the narration, you know, we know about the name being left on the back of the door by Farad, that when Wallace was in his mother's womb, what to name him Wallace, and his upbringing was always unique, and that there was an expectation that Wallace, young Wallace, would make a great difference in this community and in its history. And then in 1975, he's raised to the shoulders by the leading members of the Nation of Islam leadership. Right there to the left, there's A.K. Hassan, who still lives in Los Angeles. There's Minister Farrakhan, and there are many others. There's Muhammad Ali, who raised Imam W.D. Muhammad into this leadership role of the Nation of Islam. Now, there's another conversation that goes on about whether Honorable Elijah Muhammad, why do we honor such a man, quote unquote, why do we honor such a man who taught shirk, they say. And our contention is, from what I've gathered, is there's enough evidence that Honorable Elijah Muhammad had put down the shirk before he passed, else he would not have left the avenue for his son, Wallace Muhammad, to move into the leadership with the Nation of Islam supporting him in the leadership had he not put down the shirk, because everyone knew that Wallace had a different teaching, and Wallace was pointing in a different direction, and Wallace had picked up the Quran. The Arabic teacher that Elijah Muhammad had employed and brought into the community to teach the young children Arabic, Dr. Jamil Diab, paid close attention to Wallace and gave him extra incentive to keep reading the Quran, keep going to the Quran to find answers. So if the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had intended to stay with the quote unquote shirk mentality, the shirk that they shadow the Nation of Islam with, then he would not have left his nation, his life's work, to be carried on by the son that he had actually put out of the nation two times. He was excommunicated twice. And the third time that he came back, he was allowed to continue teaching. And then when the people would complain that he was teaching different, Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to Sister Clara, this is what we've been looking for. And Wallace can teach that teaching anywhere. When Wallace Muhammad came into office, he came in what we call service leadership. He first paid attention to all those dedicated men and women who supported his father in the Nation of Islam and acknowledged their sincerity. And that's one of his major talks was religion is sincerity. And so he would have them come to the National House, the home that was Elijah Muhammad's home. And at this one den on the left, Imam Muhammad served them himself. Of course, they had servants at the house. They had sisters who would serve other dinners, but Imam Muhammad said, no, I would serve these great men who supported his father. He would serve them himself. The picture in the middle, that's a Gordon Parks picture that was taken at Honorable Elijah Muhammad's home. At the top, of course, is the photo of Master Farad. And when Wallace said when he came into the parlor, his father handed him the Holy Quran and told him what to stand and to hold the Holy Quran. So this picture is kind of like the trilogy and one scene of the origin, growth, and the progress of the Nation of Islam. And then when Imam Muhammad began to teach us, he put great emphasis on education and the fact that man means mind. And and he used that gesture pointed to his head, man means mind. But of course, we sisters always want to remind the brothers, that's what he started. And he also said, and woman means womb of mind. So he was always conscious of all avenues, all aspects of the community in our development. Imam Muhammad rose in distinction and as a distinguished leader, and he put the Nation of Islam on the world scene. He received the accolades of national leaders. Upon his passing, we got condolences from former presidents, President Clinton, President Carter, and from all around the world. Now, we also want to acknowledge our beloved sister, as I mentioned earlier, Sister Clara Muhammad, who introduced her husband to Master Farad in her desire to find assistance for the ills that plagued the African-American man that was embodied by her husband. And we pay tribute to her, and we recognize her as our mother of the Muslim community. We recognize her role in our development. We know the story of the Nation of Islam pulling their children out of public schools, where it was, how can you have those who oppress you teach your children? And so it was the origin of homeschooling. And Sister Clara Muhammad was at the forefront of that. And after they had taken their children out of public schools, the truancy police came to her house and threatened to arrest her if she didn't turn her children over to be taken to school. And we know the saying that she said, "I'll be dead as this doorknob," pointing to the front door, "before I let you take my children." And this is a beautiful poem that was written by her granddaughter, Layla Muhammad. And I'm just gonna read the first couple of paragraphs. As we recall the shared story, the officer knocking at the door, knock, knock. She opened the door with moral courage, saying, "I'll be dead as this door before I have you teach my children." She knew that God had trusted the children to her, and she should give them to no one. That was a beautiful poem by her granddaughter. The school system started out as the University of Islam. And when Imam Muhammad came into office, he renamed it in honor of his mother, the Sister Clara Muhammad school system, one of the most recognizable of that system being the school in Atlanta, Georgia, which is also has the W.D. Muhammad High School, the Sister Clara Muhammad and W.D. Muhammad High School. And we definitely have to invest in those schools and in those efforts to keep independent private education for our youth. And in speaking about Sister Clara, I also have to acknowledge other great African-American women who supported their husbands. And this one in particular is the photo of three widows. Dr. Betty Shabazz to the left, being the widow of Malcolm. Dr. Merle Evers to the right, being the widow of Medgar Evers. And of course, Sister Coretta Scott King being the widow of Dr. Martin Luther King. And all of them in their own rights have continued to contribute in the works of their husbands. And we revere them as much as we do the work of their husband, because they have been faithful wives to their husbands and to our communities. Okay, I'm gonna break away from this sharing. And I'm gonna go back to my notes for a minute. There's an interesting occurrence that recently happened, and I will pass on the link later, but the American Psychological Association this year gave an apology for not striking harder at the ill results of racism in our country on our children's young minds. I'll come back to that a little later. we are not saying that this is the only avenue that African Americans came into Al-Islam. And I think Dr. Allen is looking for some people to address some of those other avenues. Of course, we know there's the community of H. Rap Brown being an activist within the African American movement, who's also known as Imam Jamil Al-Amin. We have Imam Siraj Wahaj and others. And we acknowledge them as leaders among African American leaders. We know there were great jazz greats who are and were African American Muslims. Well-studied jazz fans will recognize Islam's influence among some of the jazz most prominent musicians of the 50s and 60s. Yusuf Lateef, Art Blakely, also known as Abdullah Buhana, Abdullah Ibrahim, Ahmed Jamal, were all practicing Muslims who used Islamic names. And there were others who didn't use Islamic names. And today we recognize Wynette Harper and Naji among the great musicians of the Muslim religion, as well as they keep good company with Muslims. There are great men who are not as recognized, not as notable as those great names, but they're as important because they embodied also what they learned from the Nation of Islam, as well as their dedication to our African American people. Here in Jackson, actually it wasn't until I came back home till I met Brother Hollis Watkins. And some of you who are present today may remember Brother Hollis. He was caretaker at one of the Nation of Islam farms down in Alabama. Here he's known as Hollis Muhammad. But Hollis's activism started here in Mississippi. He was like 17 years old when he joined the Civil Rights Movement. And he joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And of course, what we call the veterans of the Civil Rights Movement, they get together here regularly to discuss the sheer undeniable bravery that they had to go through in terms of to move our people through the Civil Rights Movement to just, again, to some of the basic responsibilities. I want to play a little piece of Brother Hollis describing the years where he was part of the Civil Rights Movement here in Jackson. I hope I can get to the right place, because he always talked about, we were ready to go to jail. We were fighting for freedom. We were fighting for the right to vote. Then just imagine you had to be ready to go to jail to fight for the right to vote. This is one of the narrations that you can find on Brother Hollis. Hopefully it's up, everyone can see it. In this picture here to the left, that's Brother Hollis Watkins, also known as Hollis Muhammad. His prominence here in Jackson, Mississippi has been so intense until now he's an honorary doctorate. They gave him an honorary doctorate out of Tougaloo College. Hopefully, can you hear this?
The folks that was putting us in jail and all that kind of stuff back in the early 60s, late 50s, etc., knew the importance of that communication piece, and that's why they didn't want us singing. They didn't want us to be singing songs, period. You know, because I know when they had us in parchment, I did a testing thing. I just started singing a few to outright church songs. Right. You got to shit up or you going to the hole.
Right. And the hole was a hole.
Yeah, the hole was a hole, which at the Mississippi State Penitentiary was a 6x6 concrete cell. Only air you got from underneath the front door. They had 14 men.
Well, it always seemed to me that the whole point of jail, certainly in Mississippi and undoubtedly throughout the South, was to terrify you, and that involved more than just locking you up, conveying the sense that you were completely alone and isolated, and anything could happen,
and under their control
any minute by people who ruled these cages that you were in, and the whole point of it was to terrify you, and singing song just undermined that. Any form of communication just undermined that particular effort, you know. It's interesting how things change. I mean, one of the arguments, I had this argument at NPR many years ago, because they were talking about the Kumbaya experience, dismissive. Yeah. And I was saying, you could say it like that because you've never been in jail. You know, I mean, for people that were in jail, you didn't know where so-and-so was, where so-and-so was. Maybe the only thing you had to assure you communicate your life was hearing Hollis Watkins sing Kumbaya, or something like that. You know, I got really heated on this particular point.
And see, they knew that, especially those of us from Mississippi and surrounding areas, they knew that going to jail for Black men was almost like an automatic death sentence. Yeah. And knowing that could happen come at any time. So most of the prisoners, if they were doing something, they said, ain't gonna tell you no more, don't do it. You know, either you didn't do it no more, or you stood the chance of being killed. So,
I think there's one little other piece with Hollis.
One of the things that the songs did, whether we realize it outright or not, is that the songs kept us from thinking about what we were doing. And some folks would turn around and go back if they began to focus on going to jail. I don't know what my parents gonna say. I don't know how long I'm gonna have to stay.
Or I know what my parents say.
Whichever one, you didn't want the participants to be focusing on, you know, the negative aspects. So we always wanted to make sure we were singing. And sometimes we switch up and you lead, this time, and next time somebody else is leading it. But we rotated round and round of all of the different songs that we knew. Now, when we were having our little meetings, you know, we would teach one another, you know, songs so that everybody was, for the most part, up on the songs, how to sing them. Right.
And there's a line here, songs like ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, help people face police dogs or billy clubs. Just imagine the things that they were faced with. And Muslim, out of the Nation of Islam, Hollis Watkins, Dr. Hollis Muhammad, now recognized in Jackson, Mississippi, was part of that movement. He started at 17 years old. So there are a lot of people who came through the Nation of Islam, through that experience, those we talk about, those we know, and those we may not even have a recollection of. I actually learned about Hollis's role in the Nation of Islam after returning to Chicago. I knew we had farms, but I didn't know all the people on the farms. And then it was brought to my attention here. Hollis Watkins was one of those caretakers on the farms in the South. And it's kind of comical now as they are laughing about it. One of the songs they were saying, Hollis was saying, was I'm going to sit at the welcome table one of these days, hallelujah. And then it says, I'm going to be a registered voter one of these days, hallelujah. And then the last verse, he says, I'm going to tell God on Old Massa, hallelujah. So we had that strong belief that a fealty to the Supreme Being, that all of the worst treatment that we experienced did not extinguish our belief in God, no matter how distorted that belief had been, because certainly it was distorted in Christianity when we were looking at a white Christ. And when I grew up a child, Christ on every wall in every home was blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Not only was he white, he was the premier white. And that was what our parents worshiped. And that's what we were directed to as children to worship. And that is what Imam Muhammad addressed in our psyche. That was what Elijah Muhammad was addressing in our psyche. It's something that Master Farad recognized. So those who diminish, dispute the necessity of the Nation of Islam, and they wonder why another avenue wasn't taken to bring our people out of the bondage of mental bondage of the psychological bondage that was left with slavery. That's a question that can only be put before God, but it was the avenue that God gave us. And today we here on this panel who came through that, we recognize also that God saw us through it to the point where we became Muslims in heart, Muslims in definition, accepting that Allah had brought us through that turmoil. Think back on the Quranic reference to Prophet Moses joining the traveler in his feet. And the traveler tells Moses, you're not going to be able to be patient with me. You're not going to understand the undertakings that I have to go through. And Moses said, I promise I'll be patient and I'll keep silent. But as the traveler went about his work that God would have him to do, one of the things happened that the traveler came up on a young boy and killed him. And Moses was appalled that you killed a young boy, what appeared to him as an innocent child. So the traveler said, I told you you couldn't be patient with me. And Moses said, I promise. And they continued traveling. And they came to this town and they asked for assistance to aboard there. And the town refused them. And so on their leaving, the traveler fixed a fence that was falling down. And Moses again became impatient. And she said, why would you fix their fence when they were so inhospitable to us? They gave us no assistance. Then they moved further. And in their leaving the town, they were given assistance with a boat. And they crossed the waters on a boat. And when they got to the other side, the traveler disabled the boat by putting holes in its bottom. And Moses again became upset and said, why would you disable their boat when they were so generous to us in giving us assistance with the boat? And as we know those stories, and the traveler says, it's at this point we have to depart because you do not understand what my work is and what I have to do. And he said, the youth who I slayed, he was going to grow up to be a tyrant and a horrible human being who would bring shame and disgrace onto his parents. So as to the fence that I shored up at the town that was inhospitable to us, underneath the fence was a treasure for two young boys. And it was for them to grow older, for them to find a treasure that would have been their inheritance. And as for the boat, he said, I disabled the boat because coming behind us were tyrant people who would have used the boat to overrun the town that had just been kind to us. So we put our history, our experiences in the context of what Allah has given us in scripture. We have this demarcation in history. You know, we're just a small segment of God's marshaling on. You know, from the beginning of the creation, from the beginning of the creation in this universe, and Imam Muhammad say there are many universes, there are many systems of knowledge. Within our context here, we know that we are a segment that fits into a narrative, just like the Imam Muhammad used to point out, all of the prophets. They are a progression one to the other. So we are within a progression of mankind's movement. And we know that what keeps us intact, what keeps us moving forward, even in the hardest of times, coming through the worst conditions, is our belief in the one God. And we know the Quran says to us, Allah will only have to say be, and it is. So we are not a creation separate from God's creation. We are in the context of God's creation. And if the Nation of Islam is what was given for us to pass through, to regain our value as human beings, to regain our worth, then so be it. And all praises due to Allah. And we will not belittle the efforts of our parents, our foreparents, to bring us into Al-Islam proper, to bring us into sanity, to bring us out of a horrific condition of 400 years of slavery. So someone would say, well, why didn't you teach God as one first? We had to stop thinking that Jesus was God first. So the argument can go on, but the final word is, I'm here now, and that's what God had me to do. And I will respect those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for us to come through that. Now, Dr. Allen, I didn't ask you for my time frame.
Well, we wrap up around 2 o'clock. I don't know. First of all, thank you for the wisdom and knowledge that you shared. I don't know if you want to take the last 4 minutes or so, and maybe open it up in case some of our brothers and sisters have questions for you, and then we can wrap around 2 o'clock. So that gives us about 4 minutes, which gives us about 2 minutes to ask questions if we have time. If you're interested.
Okay. All right, that's fine.
Inshallah. So at this time, let's open it up for questions. If you have a couple questions that you want to ask, you may put them in the chat, or you may take yourself off mute and pose the question directly to Sister Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam, Brother Bashir.
Yeah. Appreciate your presentation today. Always have. I think some years ago, we had a convention, a national hookup, and you gave a presentation there, and you hooked me ever since. So I really appreciate too how you connect African-American Muslims with the African-American civil rights movement and the movement in the past, because this is significant. In fact, that was one of the things Imam Wardi Muhammad pointed out with himself, that he was connecting the movement of the Nation of Islam with the civil rights movement. And two, he acknowledged the great work that the civil rights movement had done and the great works that the Nation of Islam has done. I'd like to bring up one issue that came across my mind, and that's the situation with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the respect that I think that some of one of the imams outside of our community, and some that have been in and out, because I was listening to one just recently, and he wanted to characterize, although he was explaining the Nation of Islam, he wanted to characterize the Nation of Islam as Kufa. Say Kufa, they were Kufa. I said, damn, I wasn't Kufa. I wasn't no Kufa. You know, I didn't know better. And Allah says he blesses on our intention. So this situation exists. I know we had the exoneration of two brothers recently, But I think, too, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad needs to be exonerated, too. Just point out this one other thing. When the Honorable Elijah Muhammad passed, all of the national leaders, they didn't come out and say the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was a racist. He was a bad guy. All of them respected him for his social reform work that he did with his people. So we should respect Honorable Elijah Muhammad. We should respect this community and all of the African-American communities for the great work we do, and I appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Praise be to Allah. I appreciate that. And of course, we know there were leaders who were listening to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad who didn't really show their faces at all the meetings. You know, Jesse Jackson was a leader who listened to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Tony Brown was a leader who listened to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And there are others, as I mentioned, we just knew in their demeanor, when their demeanor changed, that they had in fact been influenced by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam. James Brown, when he started talking about I'm black and I'm proud, that was the influence of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad dignifying the black man and making it okay, making it popular to say I'm black and I'm proud. So we see the evidence of his influence. And even J. Edgar Hoover, FBI, we even find in their archives after the Freedom of Information Act was passed, you know, you could pull up the records of the Nation of Islam and some things that were disturbing for the idea of the infiltrators that were inside the Nation of Islam. And it's a one mark notation to say even inside Elijah Muhammad's home. But the other thing we found out is J. Edgar Hoover even had this fascination, this quote unquote admiration for Elijah Muhammad. But his was on the strictness and on the ability for Elijah Muhammad to take charge of these black men. That was what he admired Elijah Muhammad for. So we know that all of the history, all of the understanding that others had of Elijah Muhammad, they could see what it was that he was doing, and they appreciated that. And you know, one of the things Elijah Muhammad said was, I was sorry for you, speaking to the nation, the US, the United States of America. I can solve for you the black man's problem, the problem of the black man. And that's when he was saying, just give me 6 fertile states and I'll move them to 6 fertile states and we would do for self.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Roger.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I just wanted to chime in on part of the comment that Brother Bashir made that many of us are just finding out. And that is that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in his connection with the civil rights movement, also financially supported members of the civil rights movement. He was a financial supporter of the civil rights leaders that attended the Chicago 1964 Democratic Convention. They did not have funds for their hotel stay. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad financed that stay for many of them, which Julian Bond wrote about a few years ago. Just wanted to put that on the record.
Praise be to Allah. Dr. Allen, I'd just like to show a couple of panels in that second part that I mentioned real quickly.
Yes, ma'am. Feel free.
Okay. I just want to make reference to these a few things. Not only, you know, before there was the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's teachings were put in the Pittsburgh Courier and the New Amsterdam News. And this is one of those Pittsburgh Couriers. They carried Mr. Muhammad Speaks column in it. And the Pittsburgh Courier still exists today. It's one of the most prominent African-American newspapers that we have. But they recognize the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and carried his column in their newspaper. And the Fruit of Islam, the FOI, picked up that newspaper and sold it and made it a popular newspaper in the United States. And then we opened up Muhammad Speaks. And the masthead of Muhammad Speaks was the 2 brothers, African brothers reaching across the waters, the former African-American slave reaching back to his brothers on the continent. And then with the Muhammad Speaks being open, of course, Malcolm started the paper in New York, and we say 1961. So from 1961 to 2021, that's a 60-year stretch that we've been involved in prominent African-American journalism. And Malcolm was a newspaper man. There's a lot to be said. If you read the Muslim Journal, then you can read some of the narration that Malcolm talked about when he called the newspapers the big guns. And he talked about the mainstream media being the big guns that are gonna come after you and how you should have your big guns. And this was the Muhammad Speaks plant. Brothers like Brother Bashir, those brothers made the Muhammad Speaks newspaper a popular national weekly publication throughout these United States. And I just heard that the plant was sold. A brother, Mikhail Sahil's son, said one of his classmates just purchased this plant to make it into a major economic hub. So we're trying to find some more information on that. So just those few things. Here, the Muhammad Speaks plant had the only web press at the time in Chicago, a Black newspaper. And that was in the basement of the plant where we printed our own newspaper, the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. I just wanted to get those three things. And here, I just want to point to Diane Nash. Diane Nash was one of the freedom riders when she was 20-something years old, coming out of Fisk University. But Diane Nash was also a copy editor at the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. So I just wanted to get those couple of things in.
Well, let me say this too, Sister Aisha, and to our participants here. A sister of her status, if we had the finances, she deserves a very generous honorarium. But unfortunately, our fortunes are not there yet. But what we can do is to support this paper. And if you don't have a subscription in this African American History Month, you need to get one. And if you got one, you need to get one for somebody else.
Praise be to
and
Allah.
again, we thank you for all that you've done.
I actually thought you were talking about Diane Nash.
We're talking about you.
I was confused, but yeah, this is all.
We're talking about you.
Now, Diane Nash is 70. She started when she was 20-something years old as a freedom rider. She's in her late 70s now. We asked her, what do you think we should be doing now? And she said, never keep your eye off of those people who were murdered, those people who were lynched. She said, because there's no statute of limitation on murder. Emmett Till's case was recently closed, but we didn't get the outcome from Emmett Till that we got from George Floyd. But she always said, don't let murderers go unchallenged when you know they are there and you actually know where they are. She said, continually pursuing murderers of our people. And that's what the Jewish community does. The Jew would hunt a Nazi from hell and high water. Okay, I'm done.
Well, once again, on behalf of the community of Masjid Al-Taqwa and the Taleem, Sister Aisha, want to thank you for offering your wisdom and insights and these wonderful anecdotes that you share with us today to help crystallize, and deepen our understanding of, our contributions as African Americans to not just the African American Muslim community, but the Muslim community at large. And I just find really, I'm just really appreciative of your remarks today and the way you organized today's presentation. At this time, I'm going to close out with Wal Asr, and I'm going to stop the recording shortly thereafter. And if folks want to hang around, they're welcome to do so. But again, I want to be mindful of time. I want to thank everyone who took time out of their busy schedules to join us today. A lot of wonderful comments directed towards you, Sister Aisha. I don't know if you can see them all, but everyone's really appreciative of what you were able to share today. Allah Asr. إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Amen. I'm stopping the recording now. Thank you, dear believers.